to another episode of the Politely Dangerous podcast. Today I have another special guest, very good friend of mine, amazing person doing some amazing work in here. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a little bit, but very excited to have you on and just talk about the work you're doing and to share the amazing story you have, which I was able to hear at your wedding, which I feel like kind of prompted us to, have this conversation. But go ahead and introduce yourself and, tell the people who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Jenny Flora Wells. New name, yeah.
Right, I don't know.
And I am an associate clinical social worker and therapist, and I'm currently based in California and working on testing for my LCSW and launching my own private practice.
Nice. So for the people that may not know exactly what that is, let's kind of start there. Maybe on a day-to-day basis, what does the work that you do look like? Maybe how does someone get into this kind of work? Just kind of explain in your own terms.
Yeah, that's a great question. So LCSW in general is licensed clinical social worker, depends on the state. So in Ohio, it's actually LISW, so licensed independent social worker. But to become a licensed social worker, you have to get a bachelor's in social work, and then people who don't have a bachelor's in social work, you would get your MSW, so your master's in social work, and then you test to become an LSW, which I am right now here in Ohio.
Okay.
And I'm currently under 2 years of supervision to work towards my LCSW. So I'm 3 months away, and I'll be able to test and hopefully pass on the first time, and and then I'll be able to practice on my own independently.
So that's a lot of titles. How long did you have to stay in school, to get to that, certification, those degrees, things like that? How long did that take?
Yeah, so I did not have my bachelor's in social work. I had my bachelor's in early childhood education. So I had to do a 2-year master's program at Ohio State, and then I was able to test. But it depends on people's situation. Like if you have your bachelor's in social work, you can do an ASAP program, and it only takes a year to get your master's, and you go from there and decide if you want to be licensed or not. But there's a lot of different avenues of social work too, and different mental health, clinician paths that you can take as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I was definitely interested in when I saw the word holistic therapist. Is this a new term? Is it something that's been going on for a while?
Yeah, that's another great question. So it's kind of more of a way that I market my services. So it's not technically a specific clinical title, but it's talking to the approach that I have within my practice. Okay. So that's, a great question.
That makes sense. So now this is definitely, I feel like, something that to get into this kind of industry, this kind of work, it's something that you have to want to do for sure. What would you say, what's the reason why this is, a field that you've got into? It was something that you're interested in.
Absolutely. So I have a very, vibrant and kind of eclectic type of background. So I was adopted when I was, I think, a week or 2 weeks old, from Florida, and I was adopted by my adoptive parents, who were both lawyers, growing up here in Ohio. And I, grew up being very familiar with, the court system, and my dad doing a lot of work with criminal justice, and he did a lot with the gang unit downtown, and so a lot of different diverse experiences there that kind of opened my eyes to different avenues of fighting for social justice, and how people's situations can look different too, and diverse populations, and also with my own path, knowing that I kind of came from a more different background than the typical person, and being adopted from a birth mother who struggled with substance use and had a really traumatic kind of upbringing in life herself.
For sure.
And so there was always a part of me that wanted to make a difference in the lives of others, as cheesy as that sounds.
No, it makes sense, yeah.
But wanting to be able to share space with others, like other people had helped me growing up, was really important to me. So that's what really inspired me initially to go into early childhood education. I had a lot of difficulty in school, juggling with issues around adoption related to like identity and belonging. These are issues that adoptees deal with like throughout their lives, and I think too it's a population that is not talked about enough in the media.
Absolutely.
I think we have done a really great job of bringing about more awareness around mental health and different specific diagnoses and things of that nature, but adoptees kind of tend to fly under the radar, and I think it's something that affects you in all different periods of your life. And so early childhood education spoke to me because when we are children, we are sponges. So we take in every piece of information that we can to make sense of the world around us. And it was really important to me with feeling misunderstood and having those issues around belonging growing up, that maybe I could be there for another kid or my classes and students that I worked with. So I got into it thinking that I could make a difference, and kind of pushing the traditional kind of education model and providing more like social emotional learning for my students and teaching about mental health and providing something more than just education. But I realized that I was trapped in a box with the Common Core curriculum and administrative.
They're handing down kind of what they want you to teach instead of you being able to kind of do your own
thing. And especially with early childhood, you're teaching every subject, and you have to meet all of these different objectives. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's a very pivotal time in your life where you have to make sure that these kids understand XYZ. But you are trapped in a box, and you're not able to think creatively for your students and kind of meet the student where they're at.
Yeah, their actual needs.
Exactly, their needs and also their desires and how they view the world and also what's going on outside of the classroom. And so that piece for me was what kept coming to the surface, was like, what are my students dealing with outside of the classroom? I was student teaching in rural Appalachia, and so a lot of my students were dealing with a lot of difficulties outside of the classroom. So it was difficult for them to show up in the classroom. And so I just kept, thinking about that and reflecting on that when I would go home of like, I'm really focused on this, and I can't stop thinking about like, what can I do to help them? Outside of what I'm doing in the classroom. And that's when I realized that what I was truly passionate about was social work. And so that sparked that fire for me. And right after I graduated with my undergraduate degree, that's when I pursued my master's at Ohio State. So
awesome. I mean, it makes sense that somebody that has been in their shoes, would want to enter into the type of field where they, do understand the children and that, they can help. Now, I definitely want to dive into your story, but we'll kind of pause there. So, in your field, something I'm curious about, do you see a lot of people get into it like kind of the same reason you did, because they suffered from, maybe a traumatic experience as a child? Or do some people just kind of end up on that route? I'm just kind of curious, just maybe you've seen it in the field. What kind of people are coming to do this kind of job?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question too. So I can only speak on my experience and the colleagues and people that I have come to connect with. But it's really, really interesting to see what brings people to social work or just the mental health field in general, because there's a lot of different subsets of that. Like licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed professional counselor, I can go on. But I would say that everybody that I meet in the field has one reason or another, whether that be their own personal struggles with something, involving mental health. But also, I think that people get into it too for reasons around social justice, advocacy, wanting to change policy. There's a lot of social workers too that are doing macro work. So they're not seeing clients, but they're, on Capitol Hill and working on passing certain legislation. I've even met people through my MSW program who were veterans. I've met people who have worked with different populations that were underserved in the community, that they wanted to make a bigger difference in being a social worker with that community. So it does go beyond that a little bit, but I would say that everybody does have that specific passion, which is so cool to see. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So what would you say right now is the most challenging thing for adults? What are they struggling with the most with their trauma? And maybe it's not one thing, maybe it's spread out, but is there one thing that's causing a lot of trauma for people?
Yeah, that's a really great question too. It's a cliche answer, but it really depends. What I will say though is that I think that two really big things that haven't been touched on enough but are coming to the forefront of the mental health field is inner child healing and childhood trauma, and then intergenerational trauma. What does it look like to have trauma being passed down from generation to generation? I'm sure you can speak on this as well, specifically with men too. That looks different. It looks different in from different cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds, right, can look vastly different from place to place. But I think that both of those are huge, no matter who you're working with.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I mean, so when you say, I definitely want to touch on this. When you say passed down, is it possible that it's a genetic thing? Is this chemical, or is it more based on experience, where it's like, I lived in a home where it was just, I couldn't take it? Because I personally feel like I've seen some people that had bad experiences in their home and they go one way and they're fine. They're okay. And then you have other people that their life is totally just going down the drain. Like, they just can't get out of this cycle. So I guess my question is, what's the difference there maybe that you've seen? Is it just people that have learned how to battle through their traumas a little bit earlier? Some people just decide not to work through it. What would you say on that?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a combination, right, of nature versus nurture. Yeah. And I think that that's especially interesting when it comes to my story as well, being an adoptee, because it's like you bring the trauma from your adopt or birth families, and now you're living with a new family who has their own set of traumas or beliefs or values or whatever that looks like. So I do truly believe that it is kind of like a blend of nature versus nurture. But to touch on your question of do I think it's genetic? There is a certain amount of research. Now, I don't have references for you right here, right now, but I do remember studying how there's a certain amount of intergenerational trauma that can actually, it's stored in the eggs that a woman has. Even before the child is conceived, it is within that egg.
That's very interesting.
It's the genetic coding is there, that innate ancestral conditioning is in that egg.
And I've heard that before.
Yeah.
That it can, because when I heard, I'm I had heard it somewhere, and they're trauma can be genetic.
Yeah.
I was what? But I personally know in my own family, people that are maybe being raised in a good home, but still for some reason they're battling, they have these just mood swings, or they're just there's just mental things going on, and it's why? You've got it all, you've got it set, there's not really much for you to I don't know, be upset about.
Yeah.
But, you know, the person that I know, like their mom was not living correctly, you know, I'll say, and their dad wasn't either. And so it's always like, are some of these traits from their parents like showing through this child right now? Because they're acting out in a way that's just so confusing, you know? So I was always curious about, you know, things like that with personality and just maybe substance abuse and things like that, that can maybe cause a child to live a certain way. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, so.
No, absolutely. And I think you touch on so well too, like these different parts, that, like these moving parts that you're talking about, and that's actually like a certain therapy modality that I use in my practice. It's called internal family systems or parts work. And it's all about how we have this multiple mind. Like our mind is not just this one thing, like how we've known to refer to it as, right, as just the mind.
Sure, yeah.
It's actually much more complex, like we've talked about with childhood trauma, intergenerational trauma, but it's also, you know, there's certain parts of us that were wounded when we were children. I mean, trauma, this was a quote by, I think, Dr. Peter Levine, the creator of somatic experiencing, but he said trauma is a matter of life. You know, it's how we handle it, you know, beyond that, you know, the ability to heal and move past it. But knowing that it's something that happens to everybody, I think can be relieving to hear.
Yeah.
But I kind of got away from myself there.
No, all good. We're touching on a lot of different things.
Yeah, parts work, internal family systems, yeah.
This is, I mean, this topic, I just feel like you can go so many different ways with it.
Rabbit holes, yeah.
Yeah, my mind right now is going in a couple different ways, just because it's such an important topic, and, you know, there's just so many, I'm sure like there's so many answers, but there's also so many questions as well that, you know, people in your field are still trying to figure out, you know. People in general are still trying to figure out how do I deal with my trauma, you know, because it's one thing to go to therapy and it's like, okay, like I'm going to therapy, but it's like, ooh, I'm still dealing with this, you know, so all good. So I do want to switch up a little bit. I know that you said you recently became trained in EMDR.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I want you to explain that because I don't know what that is. So go ahead and tell our audience what that is.
Yeah. So EMDR is kind of a buzzword right now. It's a therapy that has kind of became popular with more famous people using it and kind of going on the news and in the media and talking about the radical transformations that they've had from it. I know that Prince Harry recently, in the past couple of years, talked about it. And then I think Sandra Bullock was the other one who kind of went completely vocal about her experience. But EMDR it stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing Therapy. So it's kind of a long...
I see why they shortened it.
Yes, exactly. So it was created by a therapist actually named Francine Shapiro, and she was struggling with, I believe, a cancer diagnosis, and she was walking through the woods one day, you know, did a lot of like nature-based therapy with herself, and I can't remember if it was her feet going back and forth as she was walking, or if she was doing something with, I think she was also doing her eyes going back and forth, but she started to notice how the bilateral stimulation of her walking in the park and, you know, moving through this really difficult time in her life made somewhat of a shift for her. And so she really took that and ran with it and developed the modality. And so it has really catapulted in recent years and has become really successful, and people have you know, added certain things to it, like internal family systems, like somatic work too, and kind of have made it this eclectic modality. But it has to do with bilateral stimulation. So she originally created it to be eye movement, but as the studies continued with it, they realized that it wasn't just eye movement. I believe that they had some clients who were survivors of like strokes or like seizures, or maybe they had concussions or things of that nature and couldn't use the eye movements. And so they started trying out things like tapping or music or sound going from ear to ear. There's a lot of different ways that you can do bilateral stimulation now, walking.
Do you have a favorite of your own?
Yes, great question. I love the tapping.
Tapping, okay.
So I do a lot of tapping with my therapist, and we also do music in the background as well, so I get like double the amount of bilateral. But yeah, it's a really interesting therapy where your brain does the healing for you. So you provide a place for the client where you are kind of bringing up a certain we call it a target, an EMDR, that the client is wanting to work on. And you go through 8 stages within EMDR to really prepare the client for the reprocessing stage of EMDR. But at the end of the day, like, the client doesn't have to talk through that trauma with you. So all of it is, there's not a lot of talking that takes place. The therapist is there with the client, as they're doing the bilateral and moving through that reprocessing. But the really cool thing about it is that their brain and their body do the healing and reprocessing for them.
Wow, that's a very interesting process there. I'm gonna definitely have to do some more research on that, because that's interesting.
You should.
And I'm sure, would you say that that's something maybe more for introverted people that are looking to do therapy? Like, is that kind of the group you see that wants this more? Because as an extroverted person, if I'm in a therapy room, I'm gonna like word vomit. I'm like, here's what's going on in my life. Here's why I'm upset. And it's like the therapist is like, oh, okay, well, let's dive into it.
Yeah, that's a really great question too. I think that there's so many different ways that I could answer this question, but I do think that it could be a good avenue, for somebody who has experienced trauma or is trying to work through some of those stuck points, who might not be like a talk therapy kind of person. But, there's also something that is kind of happening in the EMDR world as well, where certain clinicians are offering EMDR intensives. So these are for people too who don't necessarily want to go to therapy each week and like talk to somebody and like gradually get there to reprocessing. So intensives, certain clinicians will say, do you want to meet me for 3 days in a row or a weekend, and we'll do like 4 hours at a time and just like go for it with the bilateral stimulation. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so there's different approaches out there based on people's needs, which is cool.
Yeah, well, thank you for relaying this information to us and kind of bringing some new light. I'm sure this is something new for a lot of people. And how long has this type of thing been out?
Yeah, I believe that Francine developed this in the 80s.
Okay, so
I might be wrong. It might be the 70s, but it was around that scale, and then it's developed over time. So specifically to EMDR.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I want to backtrack a little bit. You said that you went through some things with your therapist.
Yeah.
So being someone who works in a field where you're trying to help people, they always say, who is the therapist for the therapist?
Yes.
That's always a funny saying that I've heard. So. If you don't mind, just what has your experience with therapy been like?
Yeah. So being an adoptee and being somebody who has grown up experiencing complex trauma, I have been in therapy throughout my life, I would say starting in early middle school. So I've seen so many different therapists, especially, specializing in, adoption-related issues. I've done talk therapy, I've done biofeedback, I've done CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy. And I just realized with a lot of the more cognitive therapies that there was just something missing for me. Being somebody who has experienced complex trauma, like there are some deep roots there. And like we talked about too with like the intergenerational stuff, adoptive family and birth family, there's so many different things going on.
Yeah.
Like I knew there was like a root cause for me, that I needed to figure out, and the cognitive stuff just wasn't getting there for me.
Yeah.
So that's when I kind of looked into more holistic backgrounds for therapy. So like more, they call it bottom up approach instead of top down, if that makes sense. So like body first instead of head first, like cognitive. So I looked into a lot of, the bottom up body based, therapies. So like somatic therapy, internal family systems kind of touches on that. Meditation and mindfulness are really huge.
Yeah, I love meditation, so
yeah.
big fan of that.
Yeah, so huge. And then EMDR, is I would say very body-based too. And so once I started to delve into that and more, holistic approaches, that's when I started to see those shifts. And so for me, in my own experience of working through my own stuff with holistic therapy, it really inspired me to take my passion for social work even further. And, I don't know, I'm just so passionate about, helping other people reach that point and providing a space where people can get to that root cause and have that deep healing, transformational experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you said the tapping, the EDMR, that's been your favorite, like, of all time?
EMDR, yeah.
I said it backwards.
EMDR, I know, it's hard.
Has that been your favorite kind of therapy to go through, or?
Yeah, so I would say I really love EMDR, but I would say my sweet spot with therapy is having an eclectic approach. So what that means is like you're taking multiple modalities and interweaving them together. So personally, like I've had a great experience with EMDR. The therapist that I'm currently working with has a more like somatic and EMDR approach, which has been so life-changing for me. And so recently I got some trainings in EMDR and IFS, and I'm currently doing a somatic EMDR training as well.
A lot of terms here.
Yes, so I'm trying to, interweave all three of them, because I believe that, no modality is like a panacea, right? Like it's all about kind of approaching things at different angles. So.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I know for me, definitely therapy is something I wanted to get into, but I think I have enjoyed meditation the most.
Yes.
Not quite there with getting a therapist yet. Not sure why, but I know for sure, like, when I meditate and just kind of move my body, like that's like been my favorite kind of therapy through the years. So,
absolutely.
But probably should still go see a person that's certified to do that. So I want to shift gears again and kind of get a little bit more personal here. Obviously, we've talked about kind of what you do, and we touched on a little bit why you got into it. Obviously you've said that you're an adoptee, but your story is there's just so much more to it than obviously just your parents kind of coming to adopt a child and then selecting you. Like I don't know the whole process, but I know when I heard this process of how you were adopted, I was literally mind blown just like of everything. So I'll let you tell it.
I can go deeper.
For sure.
So adoptive parents here in Columbus had been looking into adoption for, I think, around 6 years. And adoption specifically, like through like private agencies, takes much longer, and it's an investment, and Is
6 a typical amount of time someone usually has to wait?
I'm not entirely sure. I haven't, I know things have changed in recent years, and I know too that it's different with like the foster care system too. That structure looks different as well. But nonetheless, they were waiting and kind of going back and forth with different adoption agencies for like 6 years. And out of the blue one day, they were outside gardening and got a phone call from an agency saying, hey, we have this little girl and she's ready to be adopted. So if you want to fly down to Miami and
that's crazy.
And adopt this little girl, that'd be amazing. And so they basically dropped everything and flew down, and
because they only gave them From what I know,
Yes.
a day did come down.
I think they only gave them, they give them a certain amount of time to like decide. And I think that, I don't remember exactly, because this obviously the story was told to me, but I don't remember how many times this happened, but my birth mom, I think after they had bought the plane tickets, actually said, never mind, I want to keep her. And they went kind of back and forth, and apparently that can be typical in the adoption process, due to feeling attached.
Emotions are high. That's still their child.
Exactly. So that was their experience with that, but they did fly down to Miami, and basically when you adopt somebody in another state, and this is my understanding of how it worked in the 90s, so I don't know if it has changed at all, but my dad had explained how they were down there for like 3 weeks, but the judge or whatever wouldn't let them leave until like the Ohio judge like signed off on a paper. And since my dad was a lawyer, he like called them in Ohio, and he was like, hey, you've got to figure this out, because we like got to go back. And so that like pushed it forward or whatever, and they were able to fly back. So it was kind of a funny story. But when they when they picked me up from the hospital, I was so small that I actually had to sleep in a drawer at the hotel room. So they like took out one of the drawers and used it as a bed to like keep me stable.
That was your first night
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that was the other thing too that, was really difficult, I think, on my own development, and as well as my birth mom, everybody, the adoption, they call it the adoption triad, right? Like the triangle, is that I was born addicted to cocaine. So that was like a huge thing as well in my story. And so I do think that, I would say probably, affected my development and affected my nervous system in general, and kind of made me a more like anxious type of kid growing up. But yeah, so sorry, kind of going from place to place here, but
it's all good.
But yeah, so like my parents took me back to Ohio. I had a very normal, privileged, amazing upbringing here in Ohio, which is wonderful. And then in high school, I began to get more interested in like my birth family and like my history and what that looked like.
If you don't mind, at what age did they tell you?
Yes.
Was it like a weird moment? Did you kind of know growing up? You're like, this.
Yes. So my parents always let me know, and it was something that was like a shared experience, which I think was a wonderful way to approach it. I even had a picture of my birth mom that was in my room, and it was something that I think a few times I took to school, and I was like, hey guys, look, I have a birth mom, and I have my adoptive family too. So it was something that I always knew about, but as you move through these very pivotal, times of your life where you're trying to form an identity and trying to make sense of the world and yourself and what that looks like, I just began to become more and more interested in what that story was,
As you should.
Yeah.
As you should. So knowing that you were adopted, and I'm sure knowing at a younger age maybe allowed you to work through it a lot earlier than maybe someone that was told at like 19, 20, to where you're like, oh my gosh, I've been alive for 20 years and you're now telling me that you're not my, real parents. How did that affect you though? Growing up with your identity was, did other kids, say anything about it, or did they bully you? Like how did you deal with it as a child, just, with the questions and not knowing?
Yeah.
Like, what was that experience like for you?
Absolutely. Again, everybody's experience with adoption and with that experience of being an adoptee is different. And I've met different adoptees where it has looked different. And especially, for people's situations where they were adopted from another country, or maybe it's like a multiracial adoption, right? It brings up, even more issues, I would say, when it comes to identity and belonging and what that looks like for them. But for me personally, in my experience, I feel like, again, like that theme of belonging came up a lot for me. And so I did struggle with bullying growing up. I did struggle with feeling like, I didn't like belong in certain friend groups, and, what that looked like. I kind of forgot what your question was.
Oh, no, just what your experience was.
Yeah.
Like with your identity and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, being an only child, in my adoptive family was probably different. There's some families that adopt a child where they already have,
some favoritism could maybe peek through, maybe not intentionally, but... Or
even like just knowing that you are, you come from a different lineage than your siblings, right?
Yeah.
That can definitely bring up a lot of issues there. So I'm sure it looks different, but for me, it probably helped to be an only child. But I will say that it's something that I always thought about from when I was a kid, and then in middle school, and then especially in high school.
Yeah.
So
do you feel like it's something that you have gotten past, or do you still kind of deal with the emotions of knowing that you were adopted, or the situation that happened?
Yeah, I feel like I have done so much deep healing and connection with myself, and understanding my own history, and meeting my birth sister and my birth family in high school, awesome. Which was huge, and now having like a really close-knit relationship with my birth family and my adoptive family. But I would say that being an adoptee, it's something that is just kind of with you, not in a bad way. It's a part of your identity. And I think that in a way, as I have evolved and I've become older and, really just gone deeper and deeper and peeling back the layers of the onion with healing, right? I really love that analogy. I've just realized that I think it is a gift that I'm adopted. I think that it provides me with a certain perspective that allows me to connect with other adoptees, or maybe people in general that feel like they might not belong.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of strength that comes from the things that we go through and the adversity that we face. So. Absolutely,
I love your answer. Wow, I mean, so one thing I always love to touch on, is that human beings, we go through these experiences, and like I said earlier, some people choose to go left.
Yeah.
Some people choose to go right. And, I'm sure that there are plenty of adults that, were adopted and maybe hold this grudge. Maybe they hold this resentment, and they don't want to move past it. They hold on to it for a long time. But you've chosen to not take that approach. You want to help other people, and just kind of be vulnerable. Even doing this interview, like, just be vulnerable and put yourself out there for other people to connect and understand. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that that's something that is on your heart, that you want to pursue this route instead of maybe take a victim approach to it?
Yeah, I think, that I'm one of those people that you ask me a question, I feel like I could go at it in so many different directions. I'm very inspired by my birth family stories. I'm inspired by my birth mom. I'm inspired, by other adoptees out there. And I agree with you. It's, we kind of ask ourselves the question, why, right? Like, certain people decide to take certain paths, and I think that, that kind of flows into, how I view humans in general. I think truly that we're all born good. I think that we're all seeking love, safety, and connection. And I think it's what happens to us, right, that kind of skews the way that we see the world around us and people around us, and causes people to respond in certain ways, right? That can be aggressive, it can be, terrifying. It can be sad. It can be depressing. Everybody has their own lived experience and history that they hold within their bodies. And so I don't really think that I have an answer of why that happens, but
just who you are.
Yeah. But I do think that we're all capable of change. And I think that in a society where things have become very individual, right? It's very like fend for yourself. I truly believe that being a good person is meeting others with kindness, compassion, and care, and meeting them where they're at, right? Like, not everybody is going to be at our, ideal level of like success or, what we think the best type of person is, but I do think that there's true goodness in everybody. And like I said, I do think, in my opinion of what a definition of a good person is, I think that we're all born good. But I think it's the things that happen to us, right? It's the trauma, it's the wounded pieces from childhood, it's intergenerational patterns, it's the things that we soak in throughout our life that cause us to put up these walls that keep us safe.
Yep.
Right? It's our innate ancestral wisdom in the body that keeps us safe. A book that I think everybody should check out is, and it's become more popular. It's The Body Keeps the Score.
I started that. It's a tough
really,
read.
I know it's a dense read, but there's a lot of other books that can kind of follow that as well. There's Waking the Tiger, that's by Dr. Peter Levine, with like somatic experiencing. Anything around somatic work is very, very interesting, and how we really do hold all this stuff in our bodies. And just wanted to kind of add that tidbit.
I have that book. I just started it and I was like, whoo.
Yeah, another book I really like as well, and I usually recommend that all of my clients read it when we first start out together, is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Yeah.
Big Michael Singer fan.
Yeah, it's a great like starting point to like why, the existential why. And I think that flows so well with what we're talking about right now. And I just think that everybody deserves to be met where they're at with that compassion, kindness, understanding, and knowing too that even with our different backgrounds, with our diverse experiences, obviously look vastly different from person to person, we all at our core are like this glowing soul that is just wanting that love, that safety, that connection with others, and so what happens, when we can be a friend, show up and just even share space? What happens if we can just be there with somebody? And I think that's what's so wonderful about the career that I'm in. And so, yeah.
If only everybody thought that way, we would definitely.
I know, and it's not perfect, right? Everybody has their moments. Everybody has their parts, right? Like internal family systems. So.
We'll get there one day.
Yeah.
With your help.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for just all this information, and like I said, just being open and being vulnerable. Anytime I have dear friends or guests on this show, we do get a little deep in, the stories that the previous people have shared and you to share, it is appreciated. So thank you for your openness and your vulnerability. I know it's not easy, so I'm just very grateful. So obviously the name of the podcast and the brand is Politely Dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think we've learned why you're polite the whole time through this whole interview. So the last question, I always ask is, what makes you dangerous? And I always tell people this isn't, so much a negative terminology.
Yeah.
It's more like, what is it that makes you, in your own right, I guess, dangerous, where, you're a go-getter, like, you're a person that won't stop, won't quit. Like, what do you think the qualities that you possess are that make you kind of that way?
Yeah. So I think that the three that come to mind for me, I think that I'm very resilient. I think that my story really shows, that brilliant resiliency throughout my life. And then my last two things kind of go together, but through my own experiences and through being a social worker and through, seeing the injustices that are out there, and, there's so many people that don't have access to connection, don't have access to love, don't have access to just shared humanness, has kind of made me become an advocate and a fighter. I truly believe in, creating accessibility and sharing space, and creating a space where people can deeply heal, like I had the opportunity to through my own exploration. So yeah, that's what makes me dangerous.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again for joining us, and
Yeah.
look forward to all the great work that you'll do. We'll definitely have to catch up and learn more about your field, and just how we can help other people through their trauma, because it's something, like I said, we all go through.
Yeah.
And that we all need help with. So well, thank you guys once again for tuning in to another episode of Politely Dangerous. Miss Flora Wells.
Well, Flora's my middle name, but yeah.
Oh, okay. I should know that. But thank you so much for joining us, and make sure you guys subscribe, continue to listen, and share when you can. And as always, stay polite, stay dangerous.